All righty, ladies and gentlemen. All righty. Thank you all. Everybody can move to your seats. Appreciate the community involvement. I see all the chit-chatting and catching up. We almost done with COVID, y'all. We're gonna be able to do this like normal, hopefully next year. But I appreciate seeing y'all making eye contact, chit-chatting, all that good stuff, y'all. Good stuff. Thanks again for coming. You all know we're celebrating the Center for African American Studies 10th anniversary. I want to thank Dr. Kirby for organizing that amazing panel, y'all. Let's give her a big clap real quick. All right. It is now my pleasure to lead a discussion on the Arlington Unity Council, which is our city's inaugural racial equity task force. I had the honor and privilege of chairing this task force since June of 2020, which was established following the murder of George Floyd. At that time, our task force was comprised of 30 people who were appointed by the mayor and members of the Arlington City Council. In February of last year, we submitted our final report, and it documented a range of racial and ethnic disparities right here in our city. It also offered 57 recommendations for closing these gaps in order to ensure the quality of life for all people in our city of Arlington, regardless of their racial or ethnic background. The first person that you're going to hear from today is Dr. Barbara Odom Wesley. Dr. Wesley is a longtime resident of our city, and she currently serves on the Arlington City Council. The Unity Council was actually her idea, y'all. But she is also the daughter of the legendary Elsie Odom, who was the first and only African-American mayor of our city. She will be followed by Blaise LaFleur, who is a student here at UT Arlington, and I've had the privilege of serving with Blaise on the Unity Council twice now. I'm going to tell you more about all these people in a few more minutes, but just giving you a quick introductory. Then she will be followed. Then I'm going to share some data on racial disparities right here in our city. If you were here when Dr. Ray gave his presentation earlier, Dr. Ray also addressed the Arlington Unity Council last year, and he talked about housing, education, policing disparities, all these things that the Unity Council talked about. So I'm going to share the data for that stuff right here in our city. Where Rayshawn was sharing it nationally, I'm going to show you how it plays out right here in our hometown or city of Arlington. After that, Ms. Jennifer Wickman, who is of the Arlington City Manager's Office, she's going to provide some updates on the status of those recommendations and how they are being implemented in our city to bring about change and bring about greater equality. Before doing all that, let me tell you a little bit more about the folks on our panel today. Again, Dr. Barbara Odom Wesley is from Arlington. She moved here from San Antonio in 1980. She has lived in North Arlington for almost 40 years. She and her husband of 36 years, Curtis, have 3 adult children. She is a retired healthcare professor, y'all. She has taught at 4 different universities, including right here at UT Arlington. She's a member of the United Way. She's on the board of trustees for Arlington Memorial Hospital. She's a charter member of our city's Martin Luther King Celebration Committee, and she's also one of the chartering president of our local chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. Blaise LaFleur is currently a senior political science major here at UT Arlington. She will be graduating in May. And y'all, I have the great privilege of telling y'all that she just accepted an amazing job at our Amazon headquarters in Seattle, Washington, y'all. This is what it's all about. All right. She has an extensive experience right here in our local community with government leadership positions. She was the president of the UTA student body. She was the chair of the UT System Student Advisory Council, as well as 2 terms as a member of the Arlington Unity Council. She's also been the political action chair for our campus chapter, the NAACP, and of course, the president of the New Iota chapter of Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated. Last but not least, y'all, Ms. Jennifer Wickman has been with the city of Arlington since September of 2003. While with the city of Arlington, she has held many roles with the mayor and the council office. She's also worked with the Office of Management and Budget and Administrative Service. Her most recent position was Director of Management Resources. Currently, Jennifer serves as a deputy city manager right here in Arlington. And in this capacity, she works with 8 departments, including the police department. Want to give a shout out to members of the APD that are in the building. See you, Officer McGuire over there, no doubt. Planning and Development Services, Code and Animal Services, Parks and Recreation, and the Arlington Tomorrow Foundation. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to hand the floor over to Dr. Barbara Odom-Wesley to get us started in a discussion of the Arlington Unity Council. Hey, fellas, can you all, there we go, sorry.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here. It's my honor to have this opportunity to come share. Thank you, Dr. Shelton, for inviting me, and thank you for this program and bringing this information to the students and to the community in Arlington. As Dr. Shelton said, I was first elected to the Arlington City Council in 2019. I'm in the middle of my second term now, and I'll be up for re-election in 2023. So when I was first elected, I love the idea that Arlington is called the American Dream City. However, I do believe that it should be the dream city for everyone, not just the privileged and the well-connected. So when I got on council, I started to work because Arlington is 400,000 people. I guess we can go to demographics. We have 400,000 people, over 99 square miles. It's the 50th largest city in the United States, the 8th most diverse city in the United States. However, you couldn't tell that, not by looking at the leadership, not by looking at the city council. It wasn't a visible diversity. So as I said, I felt like it should be the dream city for everybody, and that we didn't have 2 different lifestyles or quality of life, 2 or multiple differences in our city. So it was the spring of 2020. And as Dr. Shelton described in the final report, it was like the perfect storm. So I had already started to work on an equity resolution that I felt we needed to declare our intent. And hopefully that would be followed by some intentional action so that our city did become the dream city for everyone, and everyone had equal opportunity. That's what I started to work on. And then COVID hit. And I had a model from the National League of Cities. I'd already gotten involved in that. So I was following that model for the equity resolution. And then they issued another model, which really promoted equity in the distribution and allocation of the CARES dollars to help cities and communities survive, actually, through COVID. And y'all are familiar with all the shutdowns and the economic impact, the health impact, all of that. So nationally, there was an effort to make sure we distributed the funds that came from the federal government in an equitable manner. So on the city council, I'm happy to say it was unanimous agreement on an equity resolution. And then we decided that we should just go ahead with 2 equity resolutions. One was about distribution of the CARES dollars, and the second one was a general declaration about equity in the city of Arlington. So hopefully we would reflect the diversity of our community in our leadership, in our services, you should be able to know when you come to Arlington that we're a diverse city. And we're making some progress. So we passed both of those resolutions. And then the next step was, what do we do about it? How do we implement? How do we get this done? So I visited with our current mayor, Jeff Williams, and we talked about how do we make it happen? What do we do? And then the George Floyd incident occurred. So now we had a sense of urgency. And there were racial equity committees and racial task forces popping up in every city across the country. But when I looked at it, and I looked at our resolutions, and I thought about the problem, I've been in Arlington 40 years, but I've been Black 73 years. And so I come with that perspective, and I won't go into my life story, but sometimes you can only look through, well, always, you can only look through your particular lenses. So I don't think the problem had been examined through my lens. So I felt like we needed a comprehensive look at the issue. It wasn't just a policing matter, even though that's what you saw in the news. It wasn't just housing. It wasn't just education. It was every aspect of our lives. So I really wanted a comprehensive study, a comprehensive look. So the mayor and I agreed that we needed to study the problem before we try to come up with answers. And I had met Dr. Shelton in several different capacities, and I felt like he would bring the academic rigor that we needed to the process, as well as the passion that we needed. So I lobbied the mayor to appoint Dr. Shelton, because the chair is appointed by the mayor. I lobbied the mayor to appoint Dr. Shelton as the chair, and that has made all the difference. So we formed the Unity Council, and then there was the name. As I said, all over the country, we had racial task forces and DEI committees and all of that everywhere. But as I wanted to be comprehensive, and I wanted to focus on the outcome. I don't want to just talk about this and have a report that goes on a shelf somewhere and everything remains the same. So I really wanted to look at what is it we're trying to accomplish? What do we want Arlington to look like, act like, feel like? And the Lord gave me unity, and even brought to mind a scripture, Psalms 133:1, how good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity. So I advanced the idea of calling it the Unity Council, because in the ultimate goal, that's what we want. We don't want to be treated special or differently. We just want to be treated equally. Amen? So that's what we were trying to work for with this Unity Council. I told you about the CARES. So each council member, let's see, let's go on to the appointees. Each council member submitted several names. And of course, you have to go through the vetting process with the city. So we ended up with a committee of 31, I think, citizens appointed by the city council. And that was something else that I had been preaching about. Arlington has like 31 committees, commissions, task forces to work on city issues, and very few minorities on those 31 committees. So I really challenged my fellow city council members to make sure that we had a diverse group, and city staff was on board with that. Everybody was on board with that. So we ended up with a very diverse group. And when I say diverse, of course, ethnically and racially diverse, but also gender and age, because we need to hear from a younger perspective, because folks like me, it's almost time for us to exit the stage and leave it to some innovative new ideas. So we accomplished that. And again, that made all the difference, to have all these different perspectives. So Dr. Shelton and I decided that we would divide into subcommittees. You know, he brought the academic rigor, which I'm so happy he did. So we organized into 5 subcommittees. Hopefully that would bring a comprehensive look at the whole issue of equity. Health and wellness was one area. Housing available housing, affordable housing, housing choices, everything related to housing. And I don't know if y'all looked at, I think it was Nightline not too long ago, talked about the great housing divide. And even today, we still suffer the impact of redlining. So housing was absolutely an issue. We're still looking at health and wellness, and COVID just highlighted the disparity in access to healthcare, the impact that COVID and other chronic health diseases have on the African American community in particular. So looking at health and wellness, housing was the second one, education and workforce training, access to education, even the desire to seek higher education. And everybody's not going to college, I think we all agree on that, but everybody needs a set of marketable skills so that you can earn a living in America. And I won't go into what all of that means, but we need workforce training, education, and some of the things that we came up with and some of the recommendations that you'll hear about are really outside the city purview. We're not going to open a Arlington school that the city funds and regulates. That's not within our purview. But what we can do is bring together all of the educators, AISD, UTA, TCC, the private schools, the charter schools. We can bring them all together. And you know, we have venues across the city. We have recreation centers, we have libraries, and these can become education centers. So looking at that issue and bringing a coalition, the fourth subcommittee was on economics. And there is a huge disparity when we look at utilization of MWBEs in allocation of city contracts. And we're still working on that. And y'all might not be aware, but the number of African American owned businesses that earn contracts with the city is less than 1%. I find that shocking. And it's been that way ever since I've been on council. It's moved just a little bit. And I have to say, the city staff is certainly putting forth the effort, and we've got some new procedures in place, but it is like turning a cruise ship to make these changes. You know, I come from the world of academia, and I thought change was slow there and slow in healthcare as well. But I find in city government, it takes years to make a change. So we are committed. And when I say we, I mean the entire city council, the mayor, the city staff. And by the way, when we adopted those two equity resolutions, every department head in the city signed on in agreement with the equity resolution because the recommendations were going to impact every department in the city. So they are on board, and I'm pleased about that. And then finally, the fifth committee was policing and social justice. And we wanted to take our time and get it right. You know, there were some cities that immediately put some things in place, chokehold, they don't do that anymore, and you don't do this. And our police department adopted the 21st century policing strategies that came out of the Obama administration. But we still needed to take a look comprehensively. And down the road, we agreed that the relationship between the community and the police made all the difference. So you'll hear some recommendations focusing on that. So where are we now? What have we accomplished? First of all, the Unity Council did their work, and they brought forth 57 recommendations, and the city is about the business of implementing every one. There was one that we decided we couldn't do. I may as well tell you what it is, because now you're wondering. There was one recommendation under the Policing and Social Justice Subcommittee that police officers should live in the communities where they work. I think it was at least 2 weeks is what the recommendation said. And so we talked about that. Where are they going to live? Who's going to pay for them to live there? What about their family? And all of the logistics to that. But I think we adopted the intent of the recommendation, which is to get the police in the community and make sure that they know they can relate to, and the community neighbors can relate to them. So I think you'll see some recommendations along that line. So that was the only one out of the 57 that City Council said, I don't think we can move this one forward. But we did get the intent. So we're about the business of implementing those recommendations. That's where we are. And the first thing we did was to make the Unity Council permanent. It is now a permanent City Council appointed committee. They will always be looking at unity. It's not something that ends after an 18-month study. This is something that Arlington is committed to, and we're going to always have our eye on. We have established an Office of Business Diversity that we didn't have before. I told you about the MWBE number. We've hired a new MWBE program manager, and we're right now recruiting for a chief equity officer who will report directly to the city manager. So yeah, we're making some progress, and I'm proud that Arlington is moving in that direction. In addition to the Unity Council and its work, in the meantime, we had a disparity study done, and we have all the data. We have the data that we need. We know we have disparities, and we have the commitment of the mayor, of the city council, of our city leadership, our city manager's office, that we're going to move forward. And we have a partnership with UTA, and Dr. Shelton is chairing our Unity Council committee again, and we look forward to those recommendations. I don't know how long we can convince him to chair the committee, but hopefully some of you will go to the city website, and if it's not the Unity Council, that we have like 31 committees, boards, commissions that we appoint citizens to study issues and then bring recommendations to the City Council. So I challenge you in Black History Month to get involved. Thank you.
All right, I think we're live. Okay, so I'm just going to give a few remarks pretty much on my experience with the Unity Council. And so I'll start with like how I got involved. I got elected as student body president in April 2020. So right pretty much at the start of the pandemic. And then pretty quickly, I heard about the Unity Council. People started telling me about it. I was like, what is this thing? I was like, I don't know what it is, but it sounds like it's right up my alley. I was like, what do I have to do? Who do I have to talk to get on the Unity Council? And I was like so excited about the idea of it. And so I started talking with people, I talked to Dr. Shelton. I'm like, what's up? And so after asking around, I submitted an application. I was like, shoot, I don't know if I'm going to make it on there. This is hot. I was like, I know a lot of people probably want to be on here. I was like, I don't have a connection to, a city council member. So I was like, who knows? But I was like, we'll try it. And so Dr. Barbara Odom Wesley actually called me, and I was like sitting in my room. I was like, this is the call. I was like, this is her. I was like, it felt like a huge interview, but it was like super cool. She just asked me about, what I did and if I planned to stay around, a couple years. I was like, yeah. I was pumping myself up. I was like, yeah, I can do this. And so I was really excited. I felt like as student body president at UTA, I could offer a very unique perspective to the council. And so similar to my objective as student body president, on the council, I wanted to represent students. I wanted to represent, and then of course, like for the Unity Council, I wanted to represent younger people, children, young adults. And that's because oftentimes you'll see that life just kind of happens to kids. Life happens to young adults. They don't have a lot of say in the things that they do. And a lot of the times, especially when it comes to education, because I was originally on the Education and Workforce Subcommittee, They don't have a say in their education on any level of education. They just go to school and they're told what to do and they're told how to speak and how to write and what they can't do, and then they go home, and try to forget about school. So students, and it seems like it's kind of like a rite of passage, like, oh, everyone has to go to school, but in that entire experience, students are shoved into complacency. They're shoved into saying, like, okay, yes, this is just happening to me. I'm not going to speak up. I can't say anything. I'm not an adult. I don't know enough. And so that's why I made it a point in every space that I was in to try and represent younger people, to try and represent students, to try and represent children, and try to facilitate, some sort of, conversation or mechanisms or forums that allowed students to actually speak on how they feel about things. And so there were a lot of, parallels in the work that I did at UTA and the work that I did on the Unity Council. I wanted to take an active role in changing the reality of students, especially when it came to, racial ethnic disparities. So some of the recommendations that I made on the education and workforce subcommittee were some of the same things that I was trying to do at UTA, like DEI training for students and teachers. And so that's not that easy. It's easier said than done. It seems like a great idea, but the actual implementation of that, especially when you talk about public schools, it's not easy. It's definitely not easy. And the city council or the Unity Council doesn't have the power to, implement those kind of things. But it's important to, like I said earlier, facilitate those conversations, have those mechanisms in place for students to express how they feel regarding education. I don't think I was ever asked at any point K through 12, like, how did I feel about a lesson? How did a sensitive topic make me feel? Even something as simple as, like, when you're in like kindergarten and first grade, like, it didn't really click with me, but all the examples that were like used and all the examples in books, I was like, none of these kids in this book look like me. We always use examples of, like Josh and Betty, but I was like, yeah, I don't know anyone named Josh or Betty. Like, this looks like no one. Like, I can't connect to this. And it starts with, those are the seeds. It starts with things that small, and that's when students start dissociating from school, and they're like, okay, school's over here, but my real life is actually over here. And so it's all interconnected, and it's so important to start with kids early, to catch these kinds of things early, so that they're able to be successful citizens, to be productive members of society, to feel included and to feel like they're a part of their community. And a lot of the times, because they're kids, people don't think about things like that. And it's kind of the same thing when you're dealing with young adults. You go to college and you're just like, okay, all this stuff is happening. It can be very overwhelming. So I feel like whether it's kindergarten, pre-K, or, higher education, there needs to be more mechanisms for students to speak their mind on whatever topic, that they feel is pertinent. And so as far as the future of racial ethnic disparities, in Arlington, the United States, but we'll just keep it to Arlington, I would hope to see less convincing of we need this and more doing, more accommodating, more listening. And like I said earlier, schools are very slow to change. There's a lot of bureaucracy and levels. And honestly, as student body president, I was shocked to see how many barriers I had to get through, how many people I had to talk to make such a simple change. There's all these levels, and, there's the professors, and, then there's the department chairs, then there's the deans, that you have the provost, that you have the president. And like, I didn't realize there were all these levels. And then you start talking about, well, who's the president chosen by? Oh, well, at UTA, it's like a system-wide effort. Okay, who's at the head of the system? The Board of Regents. And the chancellor, who are they chosen by? The governor. So it's like, these are things that I wasn't really privy to. So when you look at this like chain of command, it's very difficult to make things happen. the people at the very top, the chancellor and the board of regents, are so far removed from the experience of students on the college level, like real life students. So ultimately, we can't ignore the politics involved in running a school on any level, whether it's an elementary school or a university, but I hope that we can overcome it one day by doing things like this, by being a part of the Unity Council, by facilitating these conversations, and by actually acting on them. Not doing things that are performative and look nice on paper, but things that actually impact people's lives. So it has been a wonderful experience working with the Unity Council. I think we're doing some great work, and I'll pass it on to Dr. Shelton.
Hey, everybody. So, you know, when a professor who does research on race and politics in the United States is asked to chair a local committee on race and politics, I'm going to get into the data. All right. And so what I'm going to share with you all is a quick and dirty version of a presentation that I gave to members of the Unity Council last year. And this is where we had all of this data that showed all these racial and ethnic disparities right here in the city of Arlington. Now, what I'm going to show you right now is the math, the numbers, and how they translate in real world terms right here in the city with everyday people. But you should also know that our final report includes in-depth interviews. It includes focus groups. We got to let the people speak as well. As we all know, race and ethnicity is not just about data, it's about emotions too. But this data leads to understanding why people feel the way that they do. And that is fundamentally important for understanding racial and ethnic disparities in our city. Real quick, so our goal was to produce a comprehensive demographic profile of Arlington residents to gain an understanding of the scale and the location of racial and ethnic disparities within our city. You're going to see also at times that we provide a comparison between Arlington and other similar cities across the United States, as well as how Arlington compares to the larger United States population overall. And as Dr. Odom Wesley said, we looked at 5 different areas in particular. You can't do it all in one report, but we did look at economic disparities. We looked at health and wellness. We looked at housing, education and workforce training, and policing and criminal justice. Again, we did a ton of analyses of data. We used the US Census. We use, some of you all probably know if you've been an Arlington resident, our city has its own survey. And as a survey researcher, that is really rare for one city to have its own survey. Well, what does the data say about people who live here? It's never really been analyzed before. So I'm going to show you some of the first real results of a survey that's been around for almost 2 decades in this city. And we're going to finally go public with some of this stuff as we did with the Unity Council. You're going to see a whole lot of interesting stuff, but you'll see some of those cities that we used to compare: Anaheim, California, Aurora, Colorado, Irvine, Mesa, Arizona, Raleigh, North Carolina, Tampa, Florida. These are sort of big cities. They're large cities, but they're sort of not the biggest city in the state, or they're a big city that's next to a larger city. So anyway, you'll see where some of this comes down to. And it was the city's manager's office who clarified what cities we should be using as baselines for comparison. But here we go, ladies and gentlemen. And again, I'm not going to give all of these numbers. The nerdy professor can talk for years about this stuff, but I won't. But I'll get to the big picture of the stuff. Take a look at this pie over here on the right. And I want you to remember some of these numbers as we go through this. As you can see from this pie, 39%, that yellow portion of the pie, is the white population in our city. The blue population, 22%, is African American, 29% is Hispanic or Latino. That 7% there is our Asian and Pacific Islander population. The orange part of the pie are people who say that they are more than one race. What I want you to realize is that our city is a majority minority city. And you're going to see from a sociological perspective, when you're really trying to figure out how much inequality and disparity there is, a lot of that comes down to how much percentage of a city, what is the racial composition of a city? And as you're going to see, for Blacks in particular, making 22% of the population, but some of the disparities that I'm going to show you are far more than 22%. So again, just hold that in the back of your mind. Also, as Dr. Barbara Odom Wesley said, check out this bottom graph here on the slide. These are the largest 100 cities in the United States of America. Arlington is one of them. And as the good doctor said, we're number 50 right now. We were not 50 10 years ago, right? Our population is growing dramatically, and that's why we are such a diverse place. But as you look at the bottom of this, you see that big orange or red bar there? That bar is for the city of Arlington. Of the largest 100 cities in the United States, we are more diverse than damn near all of them. We are more racially and ethnically diverse than places like Los Angeles, California, than places like Miami, Florida, than places like Houston. These are places that in most Americans' minds, these are the most racially and ethnically diverse places in the country. Well, we are more diverse than they are. What does that mean in terms of addressing some of these issues? But check this one out, y'all. This is the one that a whole lot of people really knock people out. If you know what you're looking at right here, if you're an Arlington resident, you realize this is the city of Arlington, right? This is a map of Arlington. And if you see that that white circle in the middle of the map, that's where we are in the city right now. That's essentially UTA and downtown. If you look over to the far right, you see that blue area here, that's Lake Arlington on the end, and you see those little those white out pieces there, that's Pantego and Dow Worthington Gardens. And now you see a whole bunch of colored dots. The blue dots are the white population in the city of Arlington. The green dots are the Latino population in the city of Arlington. The red dots are African Americans. The yellow dots are our Asian Pacific Islander population. If you know the city of Arlington, you see the dividing line. The dividing line is Cooper. Cooper Street is the dividing line. This is what a number of people had said today, Dr. Ray in particular this morning, residential segregation. Here it is. Here's where we see it plays out right here in our city. Our final report has this graph over different decades. We show you what this map looked like in terms of the population of the city of Arlington in the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, 2000, and today. And you can clearly see the residential segregation is deeply rooted in this town. And of course, that has consequences for trajectories in everyday lives, in opportunities, and a whole host of different things. So again, economic disparities was a major issue that we addressed. Again, I'm not going to get all into this because I think it's really important that you all hear from Jennifer to hear what the changes that are currently in process. But the changes that are in process are because of the data that we uncovered. Some of the really interesting things here, as you look here to these bars on the far left over here, Arlington has a higher total poverty rate than the United States population. There are more poor people here in Arlington than there are, generally speaking, in the United States. There are more poor people in Arlington than there are as compared to just about all of those other cities that I mentioned to you all, with the exception of Tampa, Florida. On the flip side of that, though, if you look at those pies on the left side of the screen, some things that sort of stood out to me as someone who's not here from Arlington. My wife and I are from Cleveland, Ohio. And in Cleveland is the poorest big city of all in the United States of America. But when my wife and I got here 14 years ago, we realized there were more doctors and lawyers and black folks who were doing pretty well down here than there were back home. The data shows this, actually, ladies and gentlemen. There are more African Americans, there are fewer African Americans here that live below the poverty than relative to the broader United States population. So it's an interesting dynamic that we see right here on the ground. There's good, bad, and ugly. So the percentage of black folks in our city who live below the poverty line is lower than it is nationally. But the percentage of Asians who live in this city who live below the poverty line is much higher here than it is relative to the broader American population as well. Dr. Odom Wesley mentioned about minority contracts in the city, y'all. This is a fundamental issue. I was shocked at how mad black folks are in this town about some of the politics of who gets these contracts and who doesn't. And as she said, Black folks get less than 1% of these corporations. There has been some progress. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder on that one. But the point here is this is a major issue that we have addressed and will be addressed in a whole number of different ways. But this is a deeply rooted problem. What you're looking at right here is a breakdown of city data on the new Texas Ranger Stadium and the percentage of minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses who got those contracts. The vast majority of those contracts went to firms that were owned by white women. Black folks, Latinos, Asian-owned businesses were effectively left out of that process. That is fundamentally a problem because there are qualified businesses right here in the city that can do that work. Why are they being excluded from this process, right? Health and wellness. In the end, ladies and gentlemen, what you take away from this is that people of color in our city are far less likely to have health care insurance. If you look over here to the far left, you see that blue bar that is low. What that shows us in particular is that the life expectancy of African Americans is only age 75, while the life expectancy for an Asian Pacific Islander is 84, Latino, it's 82. Ask me as a father of 2 little girls if I want those years back. Ask me, do I want to live just as long? What has to happen to make sure that the quality of my life lasts that long and is just as productive as it is for members of these other groups as well? All of these tell us the same thing, ladies and gentlemen, that African Americans lag behind whites with respect to obesity rates, diabetes rates, with how they self-reported health, physical exercise. Now, let's be real, there's some of this stuff that we can control, Black folk. Get out and walk, y'all. All right, eat better. I love grandma fried chicken. I sure do, but grandma, I'm only eating one night of it, grandma, okay? Tomorrow night, we eating healthy, all right? We do have some say in this, y'all, okay? But we can take control over some of this and then go walk after you eat that fried chicken, all right? The point here also, when we talk about housing, again, Black folks and Latinos have fewer levels of home ownership. They are far more burdened by rents and mortgages relative to whites as well. Ladies and gentlemen, there are fundamental issues of disparity right here in our city. Education and workforce training. The reality is that African-American college graduates right here in the city of Arlington are far less likely to be employed than whites. After my students like Blaze worked her rear end off to get that great job, but there are too many others that did not get that job, and they have done everything society has asked them to do to get the education and are unemployed right here in the city of Arlington. Not only that, I can also show you data that shows that African Americans and Latinos with a college degree make significantly less than whites and Asians with a college degree right here in the city. Again, these are not abstract numbers. It's playing out right here on the ground. I'm going to end now with one last slide because I think it's really important that you hear from Jennifer. The issue of policing. Y'all know this is a national issue and it's ultimately what inspired Dr. Oldham Wesley to make the next step. This, ladies and gentlemen, is data from a police APD report. This is not Dr. Shelton running his mouth, y'all. This is publicly available data, right? It's actually from the 2018 Annual Use of Force report. It's on page 14. A lot of interesting numbers here. All I want to do is point out to the top row. How many times, what the data shows us is how many times did APD members pull out their firearm, right? Did they draw the weapon? And then how often did they point the weapon? The reality, remember, Black folks make 22% of our city population. 45% of the time in which those two instances happened, they occurred in relation to an African American. Clearly, ladies and gentlemen, we see those disparities are not abstract. They play out right here on the ground in our city. Maybe we need to call Dr. Rayshawn Ray and have some of those implicit bias trainings that he developed at the University of Maryland right here. Y'all weren't here for that earlier, but he's got some great stuff that maybe we could utilize right here. With that, ladies and gentlemen, the last slide I'll show you is also related to things related to tickets and verbal warnings related to the APD. Again, Blacks make 22% of the population, but get more than 50% of the tickets, right? Why is that? We know white folks are speeding the speed too. right? We're not the only ones that don't parallel park or do it in the right place. How come they don't get them tickets, right? There are some fundamental issues here that need to be addressed. This is not to say that the good people in the APD ain't working on it. They know about this too. But again, this is publicly available data that we all need to have access to, and we do have access to. With that, Jennifer, for the sake of time, I do want to hand the floor over to you. And ladies and gentlemen, y'all know the keynote speaker for this afternoon is the legendary Dr. Angela Davis, right? I know y'all don't want to hear me talk no more. You want to hear Dr. Davis. She's going to be logging on in a few minutes, and we're going to end our session a little bit early to make sure that her technology is right, okay? So I'm going to let Jennifer speak, and then we probably don't have time for Q&A, y'all. I'm sorry about that. But Jennifer, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shelton. And I can work there. Okay. Fantastic. So I will say to start out, the Unity Council was such a pleasure to work with. Those folks, as diverse as they were in so many different ways, did such a good job of working together and coming to consensus. And while we mentioned it a few times, and I know this was a mission of Dr. Shelton, they came up with 57 extremely practical and very implementable recommendations, which has been so important and has made all the difference. So I will show you. Okay, so I'll start with, is that my first one? Nope, let me back up to the general recommendations. So I'm going to go over a few of the highlights. I don't want to talk about every single recommendation, but I will tell you if you go to the city's website, which is arlingtontx.gov, and just Google Unity Council, the body that Dr. Shelton now chairs, in addition to the City Council, they receive an update quarterly on how we're doing. The implementation of this report is high on everyone's list. This is not a report that's gotten put on the shelf and is collecting dust. We are working through them. I'll show you at the end where we are in our progress. But every quarter we post that presentation. I give that presentation to both bodies. And if you are curious in a few months where we're going, the next updates go in April. So I will talk in general recommendations. These were important, and several of them have already been checked off and have been mentioned. The hiring of a chief equity officer, while not completed yet, is on its way. It's posted. We have the funding. We have the position. So that's getting going. Additionally, the data and demographics, Dr. Shelton was so interesting to work with. And he said, we have the citizen satisfaction survey. And he said, do you have it by race and ethnicity? We said, no, we don't think so. He said, ask the surveyors. And lo and behold, they had it. And it was a huge wealth of information we'd never known before. And it's important for us now going forward. We'll be looking at that information. How are different groups within the city satisfied with our services? And we're going to have a lot of insights from that. So it was a really great, just something we already had, and we're so glad that we can now use it in a better way. So also looking at economic disparities, Dr. Odom Wesley mentioned all of our work with MWBEs. She has been a champion of that at the city. She frequently reminds us how important that is, and that's important to have. Not only do we have the Unity Council saying, pushing us in that direction, but even before they brought it up, she was pushing that, and to have that as a continual reminder that it's important for us to consider that is important, because things are busy. We get rushed, all of that, but that creates a priority in our workload. And so she does wonderful work there and her colleagues there. And that's important as we work for that. But Erica Thompson, who's our MWBE manager, she's putting together a terrific team. And they are going to be working actually under our chief equity officer in order to make that a priority. So they'll have separate authority closer to the city manager outside of the purchasing group, which is important because sometimes they will play a role where they can push them to do more. I also want to talk about education and workforce training. In terms of what we have done, as Blaise mentioned, we don't run the schools, and we can't tell them really what to do. So all that work is collaborative. So there are two groups. Mayor Roth started one, an Education Advisory Council, which works with representatives from all different educational institutions to bring dialogue together. And we think some of these items can be advanced through that. Additionally, our Mayor Pro Tem, Dr. Farrar Myers, she has put together a group, a cross-organizational group through the National League of Cities, and they're working again to specifically focus on helping students like students at UTA, post-secondary students, overcome when they lack basic needs like food or shelter, how we can help them stay in school and continue on their path. So those are both examples of good collaborative efforts. But additionally, I will say from the city's perspective, we've done some things on our side. We've done good work with implementing free Wi-Fi in different places, city facilities. There's a neighborhood in East Arlington, which is a couple census tracts, that has just free public Wi-Fi. And we've had, I don't know, 10, 12,000 folks use that. And we think that bringing that in a free way to communities that actually don't usually connect, that's very important for students and others to advance their education. And we're also working on a citywide effort to put broadband through a company called Sci-Fi, which will make internet more accessible. And this is going everywhere. None of that sort of like a company who provides internet choosing this neighborhood because they think, oh, those people will pay a lot for this or that neighborhood. No, this is every neighborhood in Arlington is going to get this broadband. It'll still have to be purchased, but it will be, it's going to move through all the neighborhoods to hopefully increase that access. When we look at housing, that was very much discussed. There were a lot of recommendations. The one I'm going to focus on is on infill and redevelopment. So infill is if you live in a neighborhood and there's an empty lot, how does that get developed into a house or a duplex or something else? And then redevelopment is if there's an old apartment complex, how does that get torn down and redone? We've had a big, so a focus group was appointed and they've been working on this issue, gosh, back from almost right after the report was delivered. I think they began in the spring of last year, and they've been meeting and talking about this. They've worked on a concept called missing middle housing, which Dr. Odom Wesley is very familiar with. She heads the committee that this information is coming through at the council. And the missing middle is basically anything between a single family home and an apartment complex. So these are like duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes. Our development community told us it was too hard to develop that kind of housing in Arlington. So this is housing that is affordable, so people can afford it. It's also attainable. It's available. You know, you all can go out and find it. I'm not sure how student housing is, if there's a crunch in student housing like there is in all other housing, but it's hard to find housing out there. Even for people who have some funds and can pay the rent, it's just difficult. We don't have a lot of it available. Under health and wellness, the health and wellness subcommittee focused on the disparities in not only health outcomes, so the disease and the life expectancy that Dr. Shelton pointed to, but also in availability. How can they get access to that healthcare? So they asked us to look at, can we increase health clinics, access to healthcare around, and also transportation, which I thought was really interesting and insightful. They wanted to push to make sure that students could, not students, but everyone could access that, could get to that location. And so the city's rideshare program, VIA, has expanded citywide, and the council is going to continue to look at more ways to make that perhaps available at a discounted rate for folks who qualify in a certain way. And policing and criminal justice, I think, is going to be my last. So a lot of work there, important work. That group was concerned not only with how police interacted and made connections with the community, but also on officer mental fitness, mental health, handling stress. They had a lot of concern for the officers. So it was an interestingly balanced approach, which has been helpful, and we've been working through with our folks at PD. The final, I will just show you where we are. This is every quarter I sort of come with it's not really a batting average, it's sort of our completion rate, but you can see we're at about 12% of the 57 have been completed. We're super pleased about that. We're continuing to move these forward. Pending means we haven't started it yet. Usually that's because a key person we don't have. A lot of times that's our chief equity officer. There are several of these we want him or her to initiate and to work on. And since that person hasn't been hired yet, they're not working yet. So you can find my email and my connection on the Arlington City website. Happy to answer any questions at a later time. And thank you so much for letting us come here and speak about this important effort.